He was born at land Apathy. His name was CodEye. Shunned by a cruel society, he retreated to his shack. His one passion was to tell stories. But he had no stories. He met a traveling man who would regale him with tales. One day CodEye did him over and decided to ignore the copyright infringements. These are those stories.
Space. Sometimes up, sometimes down, but always around. The final frontier, an endless vacuum consisting of planets, stars, black holes and television satellites. Man has travelled into space. So did a Russian dog once. Don't know how he could work the controls, though. In space, these planets consist of the likes of Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, or in the case of this story, Mars, a warm desert-like planet in which the Chinese have decided to invade. Well, no, I can't really say invade. That's just my racial prejudices coming to the fore again. But they certainly did land on there. I can assure you, an invasion was probably on their minds. It was a Thursday morning, just after a successful science class, where he'd finally been able to teach the kids about the atom bomb. Mr. Richards sat down at his desk and opened up the bottle of brandy he'd stashed in a secret compartment in one of his drawers. He poured himself a large glass, unknown that over in Bristol, the British Department for Space were making a startling discovery. Major Rogers was sat in front of the computer, checking his Twitter, when he made the discovery. He turned and called over his colleague, who was busy making a cup of coffee.
Lieutenant Rogers, get over here right now.
What?
The Chinese have landed a probe on Mars.
Are you serious?
Yes, Stephen Fry has just tweeted about it.
Lieutenant Rogers stopped what he was doing and ran in.
Bloody hell, you're right.
I know.
Now everyone will think that the Chinese were the first on Mars.
But we landed 2 Beagle probes on there ages ago.
But they both crashed and went missing.
Also, according to someone else on Twitter, there's rumours that because the probe was so successful, they might land people on Mars soon.
They're just rubbing it in about our beagles. I won't stand for this.
What are you going to do?
Not me, Major Rogers, but the British Department for Space.
So, both of us then?
That is a slight exaggeration. There's more than 2 people who work at the British Department for Space. For example, the janitor, plus the work experience boy comes round every summer.
We can't have the Chinese just tagging Mars as their planet, not after we got there first.
There's another tweet coming through.
What does it say?
It's the Chinese Space Agency. They're pleased to announce that preparations have begun on the next rocket, and they'll be landing a team of people on Mars in the next month.
That's surely more than 140 characters.
A nice pop culture reference for those of you who use Twitter. I have a Twitter account, you know. You can follow me at official CodEye.
So, what's the plan then?
Where's that drawing you were doodling last night before bedtime?
What? Godzilla eating my old headmaster?
No, the rocket.
Which one? The new hydrogen-fueled super-efficient rocket system that I created, or the one I drew of me and you going to the moon?
The one of us on the moon.
Mum stuck it on the fridge. She said it was, and I quoted,
"The best you have drawn so far." Right. Well, go home and get that drawing. We're going to build a rocket and get to Mars before the Chinese.
What about funding?
If we build it from recycled materials, it shouldn't cost too much. Then we tell the government that it's eco-friendly. Piece of cake.
Cake? Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go get some then.
They both left the control room. Major Rogers went home and to get the drawing of the rocket, while Lieutenant Rogers went to convince the Prime Minister that it was a matter of urgency they send a rocket to space. Over the next week, Major Rogers and Lieutenant Rogers set about building the rocket that would take someone to Mars. The command module was constructed out of a greenhouse they'd stolen from their next-door neighbour, while the rocket's main body was built from road signs they'd also stolen. Add onto that a Pringles tube exhaust pipe, and you've got yourself the latest rocket the British Department of Space had developed. The name emblazoned down the side read, British Department for SPAC, as they'd ran out of room when painting it. Major Rogers and Lieutenant Rogers stepped back to admire the rocket.
Look at her. She's a thing of beauty, and it only cost £25.
I don't know. Are you sure it's safe?
It's a bit ropey in places, but I reckon she'd hold up against a couple of G's on take-off.
Mr. Tomlinson's greenhouse didn't hold up against that football you kicked at it last week.
Yes, but there's no football in space. It should be fine.
What about an astronaut that's willing to fly it?
Well, we couldn't get funding off the government for that, nor the insurance or training. So it's got to be a volunteer who's brave and adventurous and knows a lot about science.
I'll check Twitter then.
Good thinking.
Major Rogers logged onto Twitter and punched the words space and science into the search to see the recent tweets. Meanwhile, after a bad day's lesson, Mr. Richards sat down at his desk with a brandy in hand and poured out his frustrations on Twitter.
There's one here, and at Science and Brandy says he hates being a science teacher and wouldn't mind going into space.
Go on his profile, get his location, and go get him.
But it's Saturday. He won't be in school until Monday.
We'll wait until Monday then.
Monday morning was the usual structure for Mr. Richards. He had the Year 7s, followed by the Year 10s, and it was lunch. He was about to hand out the textbooks to the class when Major Rogers burst through the door.
Mr. Richards, congratulations. You're going into space.
What?
No time for details. You've got to get you into space before next week.
But who teach the Year 7s about gravity?
Just then, Lieutenant Rogers walked through the door, wearing his best tweed jacket.
Good morning, class.
Who's this?
I'm Lieutenant Rogers of the British Department of Space, and I'm to look after your class while you're away in space.
Do you know anything about teaching?
Of course, I know about teaching. I've got leather patches on the elbows of my tweed jacket.
Isn't space dangerous?
Of course not. It's no more dangerous than crossing the road.
I can vouch for that. Last time I crossed the road, I got hit by a car. Shortly after that, I was chased by a mob bearing flamed torches.
I'm still not sure.
Listen, this is a matter of high scientific value. Now, you can continue to sit here and stare into the lifeless fish eyes of your students for the rest of your life. No offence, kids. Or you can hitch up your britches and go on and do something with your life. Become a hero of Britain, a hero of science. Plus, you don't really have a choice. Now you can come quietly, or we'll have to chloroform you.
Resigned to his fate, Mr. Richards decided to go with Major Rogers. It was the morning of the launch, and Mr. Richards was sat in the command capsule, staring up at the stars above him, when a voice came onto the radio.
Ground control to Mr. Richards. Take your protein pill and put your helmet on.
Mr. Richards followed the order and put his helmet on. He then took his protein pill, which he soon realised was the wrong way around to do it. Major Rogers began the countdown.
Commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition, and may God's love be with you.
Then and an almighty roar shook all of Bristol as the rocket launched magnificently into the air. Mr. Richards, who'd had his eyes closed since taking his pill, finally opened them and unclenched his cheeks. Make of that what you will. Through the glass of the greenhouse, he looked out at the planet Earth, quickly vanishing beneath him.
Ground control to Mr. Richards. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know what shirts you wear.
My wife buys them for me.
Calming down after the launch, Mr. Richards reached inside his spacesuit for his flask of brandy. He took a few mouthfuls and rested it on the side, when suddenly out of the distance came...
Psst! Hey, you!
Mr. Richards quickly looked around.
What are you doing?
Hello? Who's this?
I'm the Booger Man.
Don't be preposterous. There's no such thing as the Booger Man.
All right, it worked once before. My name is Alfonso El Dorado.
Oh, no. Not this guy again.
What are you doing on this spaceship?
Well, it's a long story, huh? I was meeting this Chiquita at the BHS to do some shopping for cushions, huh? And I must have got the wrong address or something, and I've ended up here. Hang on, did you mention a spaceship?
Yes.
So, let me get this right. I'm in a spaceship?
Yes.
Alfonso emerged from one of the lockers at the back of the command module.
No, you've got to get me out of here.
I'm afraid I can't do that, Alfonso. I'm on a top priority mission for the British Department of SPAC. I've got to land on Mars before the Chinese.
Look, you don't understand. I got to get out of here.
Alfonso reached for the steering controls of the spaceship to steer them back to Earth. Mr. Richards pushed Alfonso and tried to grab hold of the steering controls, causing him to knock the flask of brandy over the control desk, angering Mr. Richards as he wrestled Alfonso.
No, take this. The pile driver. Oh, you like that, boy?
Eventually, Mr. Richards was able to counter the pile driver that Alfonso kept laying onto him, allowing him to get Alfonso into a headlock and stuff him into the airlock compartment.
Hey, can you in here? I've had a bad experience in a tight space before.
One wrong move and I'll jettison you.
There's no need for that. Listen, we can talk about this.
Mr. Richards made his way back to the control desk that was now malfunctioning from the brandy that was poured over it. He tried to use the steering control, but it was now jammed. Major Rogers' voice came through over the radio.
Ground control to Major Richards. Your circuit's dead. There's something wrong. Can you hear me, Mr. Richards? Can you hear me, Mr. Richards? Can you hear?
And there he was, sitting in a tin can, far above the moon. Planet Earth was blue, and there was nothing he could do.